So with the release of Fast X, I've decided to do a Fast and Furious franchise tier list because in all seriousness, I think this may very well be the best film franchise of all time. There is something so uniquely special about this franchise. Beyond that it's batshit insane, because it is, beyond the beautiful action which it has, I think this series has so much heart behind it. Because yeah, it's easy to go into the next film to see what insane concepts they come up with next and see how they level it up this time, but honestly, it's just as essential to the fans that we get updates on these characters' lives and get to spend time with them. Because though yeah, the meme is all about family and all that, but beyond how corny it is when they say it, you do genuinely believe it to some extent. You believe these characters love each other as much as they say they do. It's a wonderful series at its core and an insane one on the surface, so I'm going to go film by film in release order, tier list them and give my brief thoughts. Spoiler warning for all of them. So our first one is of course The Fast and the Furious, which everybody knows is about as normal as these movies ever are. It's relatively small scale, the big third action set piece would be like a footnote in one of the later movies, but the most exciting thing in this movie action wise is when the cars go under the trucks like this. And it honestly does kind of keep me giddy every single time I see it, if I'm being honest. Now, as someone who doesn't like cars, or at least isn't interested in cars in the slightest, these films make cars the most interesting thing ever. It's a mark of really great filmmaking when it makes a subject you don't even like interesting, and this film is all about cars. Well, that and pure raw masculine energy. I love seeing baby Vin Diesel, who was pretty intimidating in his own right, but compared to now where he's just this big bulk of a man, it's pretty fun seeing him so baby-faced. That applies to Paul Walker too, and having Ja Rule in this movie may very well be the funniest thing about it. Just the presence of Ja Rule is hilarious. Like, this must have been a big thing in the day, but now it literally means nothing. You could ask any kid under the age of 20 who Ja Rule is, and 80% of them are not gonna know what the fuck you're talking about. But otherwise, the whole cast is great and really amazing actually. They even got Buffalo Bill in here to play Sergeant Tanner. But what I think is super interesting about this film that doesn't really become apparent until rewatches is that it doesn't have an antagonist. Because both Brian and Dom are essentially good guys, despite each of them having a sort of grey morality and kind of play on different sides of each other, but also on the same kind of side, you root for them both. Vince is the closest thing to a bad guy, and honestly, it's kind of fucked up, because he was right about basically everything and he gets villainized for it. I don't like him at all, but he does have a point. But the fact there's no villain actually shows me this film is way better than the general population actually thinks it is. It is unironically a pretty good film. It has tension without an antagonist, there's genuinely cool shots like this shit. There's a cute moment in the first race where Brian claims he nearly had Dom, and Dom gives this actually great and charismatic speech. It has a pretty satisfying conclusion, and yeah, it's kind of a bro movie, but it is a good, small-scale, fun movie. There's corny line delivery,
I never knocked on nobody!
And it creates the ingenious concept of NOS. The aesthetic is fun, it makes cars cool, all the characters are charming and likable, you get unironically invested in the storyline, it's a solid time. Nothing too brilliant, but I never leave this film needing more. It's a safe B-tier film. But next we got Too Fast, Too Furious, and man, the jumping quality is insane. I fucking love this movie. The name Too Fast, Too Furious is so ridiculous, so outrageous, so iconic. They really killed that shit. They bring in a new rapper this time round by introducing Ludacris as they kick out Ja Rule as the resident rapper, and that choice could not have been better. Not only in terms of characterization and acting, but on the soundtrack too. Batej is a goated character. And Luda has so much charisma and fun in the role, it's infectious. They also introduced 2000s R&B star Tyrese Gibson as Roman Pierce, who adds a different layer to every film moving forward. They have smaller roles that don't get reprised but I love, like Suki or fucking Sucre from Prison Break, and the way they reintroduce Brian like he's the fucking Undertaker at WrestleMania. Oh my god, it's so good. It's all absolutely branded with 2000s aesthetic of filmmaking, like the sped up artificial speed, the zoom ins, shaky cam, sexism, and equally girl bossing. And speaking of girl bosses, movies in general got so much worse when they stopped putting Eva Mendes in them. What a gorgeous and talented woman, oh my lord. But other than that, this film is again pretty small scale compared to later on, but they kick it up a notch a little, starting to add in some more of the crazy concepts. Also, I love that in this film, Tej is just like an ex-street racer, turned fantastic showman and host, and Roman is a tough guy with a rough past who's up for anything, but now Tej is a tech genius and part-time Donnie Yen, and Roman is just an idiot who says funny shit. And Paul Walker this time round has bumped up the charisma, he's got that fucking goofy smile that we all fall for, but he also becomes genuinely cool in this one, aside from that one line.
Drop it, I don't want to talk about it.
Drop it, hell. I want to hear about this, homie.
So forget about it, killer.
But I think it's all down to John Singleton, who was a brilliant director. He managed to make this small 2v2 drag race super intense and something to invest in. Like, the stakes were just the cars, which in these films now, getting new cars and customizing them is as easy as a jump cut, but in these earlier films they really had to earn that shit and work hard on them. And we get an actual villain in this one with Verone, who has the most brutal torture scene in cinema history. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but it makes me super uncomfortable personally. I think it's kinda criminal they never brought him back in a later film. He's a good character and Cole Hauser plays him perfectly menacingly. The car switch around scene is iconic and makes me so giddy to see, and the comedy is perfect. It's corny in a great way. The heart is definitely there. They fill in these characters with some genuine emotions and passion, and it never ceases to make me feel good afterwards. The iconic line delivery continues. And for that, I gotta throw it in S tier. It is quite possibly my favourite film in the series. I say quite possibly because the next film is Tokyo Drift, and damn. So this film at the time was a huge departure from the rest of the franchise. We changed the country, we changed the style, we changed the cars, we got no Brian, no Letty, no Roman, no Luda. We get a Dom cameo at the very end, but we do get Sean, who I think is such an underrated Fast and Furious character. Not even protagonist, but just character. However, this film did introduce the fan favourite Han, who was so popular despite being dead at the end, they brought him back in later installments and made all of those films prequels to this one, until of course where he leaves for Tokyo in 6. But this film is just incredible. It starts out goofy as fuck with a redneck racing a jock for a girl which no self-respecting girl would ever sign up to, and his punishment for causing all of this property damage isn't jail, isn't a fine. They make an agreement to send him to Japan, which is not how any legal system in the world works. Mwah! It's beautiful. They also introduced the greatest main theme song in this franchise that stays in my playlist to this day. There's some unironically amazing shots in this film, like the transition from the wall to the plane. I adore everything about this, like how they solve Yakuza beef with drift racing down a mountain, and I love Sean and Han's friendship so much. Bow Wow being in any movie is automatically hilarious. Han is of course legendary and gives that great speech about Tokyo being his Mexico. And this is the first instance of a main character actually dying in this franchise. Well, as we know, he doesn't stay dead, and we'll get to how I feel about this retcon later down the line because his death has actually been retconned twice. Also, I love how Dom turns up in the end to tie into the larger universe, and they used the Don Omar song to introduce Dom, which is great. The Hispanic music has always been the heart of the musical universe of these films, and that song in particular is the golden example of that. Also, people must have been so confused as to how Dom knew Han, because we had not seen Dom since the first film, and when we did, Han was not there. But all in all, this is a fucking great installment in the franchise. There's so many little moments I'd love to talk about, and one day I may do a video entirely dedicated to this installment, or Too Fast Too Furious, but for now this will have to do. And if you couldn't already tell, I'm throwing it in the S tier just below Too Fast Too Furious, but know that on any given day these two could switch. Okay, so next is Fast and Furious, not to be confused with The Fast and the Furious, and this is truly the one where the franchise switches gears and gets into the insanity, at least partially. We kickstart with a big action set piece, and it's just good to see Dom and Letty in one of these films again since they hadn't been in one since the first, which is weird because this franchise is for sure the Vin Diesel show. But he wasn't present in the second or third installment, so to have him back feels just right. Also, we see the return of Han, which is always nice. He's a great character, and overall this is a fun time, but the problem is, it isn't enough about racing that it holds up to the previous three, but it isn't insane enough to shine a light on the next ones. It's definitely the weakest of the series so far in my opinion. Now yeah, there are some insane parts of this movie like how Dom uses the Force and then like never really does it again, which is hilarious. He holds up a whole engine block with one arm, he gets shot and it's like an inconvenience more than anything, but in terms of truly insane shit, there's not a whole lot. It is mostly just a standard action film that operates roughly within the realm of heightened possibility that most action movies operate in. We get some fun and exciting races though, especially the GPS race with Dom and Brian. It really feels like something from the first film, just with heightened stakes. They introduce Gal Gadot, who generally, in my opinion, isn't a great actress, but this franchise oftentimes doesn't require you to be, and this is easily her best role in my opinion. The kind of frenemies thing Brian and Dom have this whole time is really fun, and the setup for the next film is exciting. The one thing this franchise really knows how to do is stick the landing. There isn't a single ending in this franchise that isn't satisfying or enticing for the next film, so though I don't think this film is that great, I do think it is good. Genuinely has some true to form Fast and Furious moments, so I gotta put it in D tier, which may seem a little harsh and it maybe is, but that's just how I'm feeling right now. But next up we have Fast 5, and holy shit does this franchise pick up. So though I said the last film is where they started to get into action territory, this is the film where they lose their mind and start to operate within their own idea of reality. First of all, it starts exactly where the last film ended and gave us the premise of them being on the run from the government, which was a new idea for the franchise at the time. Nowadays, that's an everyday occurrence for them, but here, that was truly exciting and new, and it's fun. They bring back Vince, which was genuinely a genius idea. He's honestly such a complex character at this stage. We of course know he was right about Brian and now has to live a life in Brazilian slums, but also Brian and Dom are good friends despite those events and they've moved on, which Vince can't have moved on from yet, so bringing him back was definitely a great story decision. And from this moment on, these films are not about racing. They are a little bit, and they are always about cars to some extent, but the main focus of this franchise from now on is going to be balls to the wall action. Dom isn't just some low-level thief stealing DVD players whilst being a part-time god-level street racer anymore. This man is a bona fide Jedi Master black belt action star, but the true signifier of how good these films are about to get is the comedy.
Matt, give me a cross-check on Reyes, full specs. If he goes to the John, I want to know how many times he shakes it.
You got it, boss.
Why me?
Because you got the biggest mouth.
That's for damn sure. Swear to God, if you was on the other side of that glass, I'll bust your damn face in. I translate that.
The line delivery on all of these is so nonchalant and beautiful. It's inspired. It really is, and I love how they assemble the team like they're the fucking Avengers, and it's great seeing these characters back together or meeting for the first time. It truly does feel like a big moment in the series, and this entire movie feels like a big moment for the series. The action is on another level to everything we've seen, the comedy is perfect, the cast and the dynamic between them is brilliant, the introduction of Hobbs into the series was an excellent decision, the small moments like them trying to clock the timing on the cameras, or Gal Gadot using a man's gross sexual misconduct to pull his handprint, or the quarter-mile race, which is a fun callback to the earlier films, but also the small twist that Dom let Brian win because he's having a baby, are all magical, and there's a million of these moments. But the best part is quite obviously them dragging this save through the streets of Rio, which is absolutely outrageous, and honestly, though comparatively small to the next movies, is one of the best third acts in the franchise, if not the best. This film feels like an ending chapter in a lot of ways, especially given the satisfying ending for all of our characters, which is weird, but ultimately this film is one of the best in the series without a doubt. I'm dropping it into A tier, though I can easily see how it can be S tier for other fans of the franchise. It just slightly misses the mark for me, but A tier is obviously still incredible. Then sadly we get a downgrade in the form of the next film, Fast and Furious 6. For one, the title is the first and only generic title in the franchise. The action is a bit bigger but not necessarily better. They redo a few of the bits from the previous movie. The villain isn't all too compelling, especially when we consider he's attached to the other Shaw, who is evidently the bigger fan favourite, but it isn't all too awful. I mean, though the comedy is a bit less great than the last, there's still some great bits.
So now we work for the Hawk? That's what we doing? Why do I smell baby oil?
You keep running your pie hole, you're gonna smell an ass kicking.
Guys, we gotta come up with another plan. They got a tank. I'm sorry.
Did somebody just say a tank?
And an early joke that leads to one of the best spit takes in cinema that is also famously improvised.
That could have been my forehead, man.
Nah, that's not as big as your forehead.
Hey, Mia, you better hide your baby oil.
I'm just playing. You better hide that big ass forehead.
I was just joking.
There's a cute scene where they flex their car knowledge, which is great. I love the myth that the CCTV here in the UK is insanely intricate and plenty, as if this isn't the quality of them. But this film fully leans into the insanity too, so here's the cartoon shit that happens in this movie. Dom turns into a superhero and pulls off this maneuver without as much as a headache. This third act battle on the plane is ridiculous enough, but then consider it takes place on the longest runway of all time. This car flips and crashes on Brian and it's treated as if he got pushed over or something. And more to do with the filmmaking, but due to on-set problems between Vin Diesel and The Rock, they couldn't be on set together, so these insanely awful shots actually made it into a real studio movie. And on a less insane note, but just a general nice one, they played the Don Omar song again from the first film to really tug on those nostalgia strings, just before teasing Jason Statham as Shaw in the mid-credits, which is the first time they retcon Han's death. They do this because this is the one where he leaves for Tokyo in the end due to Giselle's death, which was obviously going to happen since we know she isn't in Tokyo Drift, and overall it's still a very decent time, just the very standard setting you can expect from this franchise, so it's slotting right into the S tier. Which is again quality whiplash because we go from there to Furious 7 and fuck, this movie is good. So now, as we know, Paul Walker died during the filming of this, so they had to CGI add him into some of the scenes using his brother as a body double, and yeah, in some moments you can definitely tell. This was the film that always stopped this franchise for me because every time I'd do a rewatch it was so hard for me to get past this installment. But we'll get there. So the film starts out with Jason Statham giving a fucking Modern Warfare intro.
They say if you want to glimpse the future, just look behind you. I used to think that was bollocks.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Boundaries shift, new players step in, but power always finds a place to rest its head.
And then we go to Race Wars from the first film, which is a nice callback that they didn't have to do, but they did because this franchise above all else cares about its fans. This thought is amplified by the random Hector cameo, and is that Iggy Azalea? Anyway, there's some outrageously goofy and brilliant action in this film, like how Hobbs rock bottoms Shaw through a glass table.
Look out, King! Look out! Rock bottom! Rock bottom! You're spotted through a table!
Then he's blown by a grenade out of a 4-story window and lands on a car, decimates the car, but he himself comes out with barely a broken arm, which he ends up flexing his muscles and taking off the cast in a later scene anyway. They introduce God's Eye in this film, which is just the stupidest piece of technology ever. This plane and parachute set piece is incredible and one of the best sequences in all the films. It's such BS and I love it, as is the Abu Dhabi job where they drive the car through 3 skyscrapers. Brian goes toe to toe with fucking Tony Jaa, who, for those who don't know, is a martial arts film legend. Go see Ong Bak immediately. Also, Letty has gone from great racer to a karate specialist, taking out several royal guards and Ronda Rousey. Dom crashes his car off a mountain, comes out of it fine, but somehow Ramsey, who was wearing a helmet, is somehow injured and knocked out. There's a moment where Vin lifts a fucking car and it turns into an Ocean's movie for a whole plot point. T-Pain is for some reason here and the insane quotes are still around.
Thing about street fights, the street always wins.
And they even try to convince you this kills Dom despite seeing all the insane shit he's done in the previous movies and even this one. It's incredible. Because the one thing Vin Diesel and the writers and producers of this series understand more than anyone in the industry is that the vibes and the feelings are more important than logic and realism. Whether something makes sense is irrelevant when it brings out such visceral emotions out of the audience. This goes for the action mostly, but even in the sorrowful moments where Dom and Brian drive away from each other in the final moments, despite knowing they gotta go back to the beach, it works so well because this moment is crazily emotional and it makes me cry every single time. It works, as does Kurt Russell's character as Mr. Nobody, because he's one of my favourites in the series and Russell just knows exactly what kind of movie he's in and plays it so ridiculously well. He understands the vibes. I love how they go in Tokyo to tie in Tokyo Drift with the universe properly, and then like Dom beats Sean in a race, implying that Dom is like the new Drift King or something, and he did it in his Dodge Charger or whatever. So this film is easily S tier for me. Everything is on point, from the action to the batshit insane action to the emotional moments, the final resolution, the send off to Paul, the villain in the form of Shaw is top tier, and any film that creates such intense emotions on all ends of the spectrum deserves its spot at the top. Just going behind Too Fast Too Furious because at this moment it's definitely my favourite. Okay, closing in on the end we have Fate of the Furious, which is a tough one because this is an insanely tough watch without Paul Walker. The hole he left on the franchise is very evident, but this may be the best film in the franchise when it comes to aesthetics, direction, cinematography and all those good things. The shot composition is nice and it's clear that F. Gary Gray is one of the better directors to touch this franchise. The film just looks beautiful, especially in the beginning in Cuba, and man, Dom driving a burning scrap car across the finish line and winning the race in reverse is just what these movies are about. It's silly and comedic, insanely cool looking, zero logic behind it, intense as fuck, and in the end everybody feels good. But also this film kind of flips the franchise on its head and turns Dom into the villain, which is great and refreshing because though we face many great foes in this series, Dom has always been the true fucking superhero. Now obviously the reason he's doing what he's doing is made clear, and you know that Charlize Theron is the real villain even on both sides of the conflict, and it becomes even more intense. These films manage to get you so invested in the most insane fucking concepts cinema has to offer, and I adore it, and this is honestly one of the brightest examples of that. The betrayal of Dom is so fucking painful and hard to watch. I feel betrayed as an audience member, and that isn't all that's great. Obviously the comedy is still there. Roman has dived headfirst into the physical comedy at this point. Jason Statham brings his comedic chops for the finale, and the prison escape scene is genuinely well choreographed and shot. It's like a Kingsman fight. The only real problem is, given the stakes of the plot, they would absolutely call in Brian, which I know they can't do because of, you know, death, but it's an obvious problem. Dom has always been this so-called figurehead of the series, but Brian has always been the heart of it. The third act battle is the biggest this franchise has ever been, but not necessarily the best. Again, the cast dynamics are brilliant as always, and the dynamic between Hobbs and Shaw especially, so it's obvious why they got their own movie, though I think Tej and Roman deserved one more, and given the outcome, probably would have been better too, but that's in a moment. For now, I'm going to give the Fate of the Furious a B tier slot. Honestly, if it weren't for the hole left by Brian, this could have easily been A tier maybe? It's such an underrated installment, but I'm gonna have to go just under the first film in the B tier because I rewatched that one way more. Next we have Hobbs and Shaw, which is F tier. I hate this movie so fucking much. It has decent moments like this montage scene of the morning routines, but the comedy just isn't there at all, which is a dramatic shame because Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham play these characters so fucking well. They do like this Deadpool kind of bit.
Your big, stupid face. Looking at it makes me feel like God is projectile vomiting right in my eyes.
I just dislike nearly every facet of this film, and I think it's genuinely the only bad movie in the franchise. So yeah, F tier, get it away from me. Okay, so for our penultimate movie of the franchise so far, F9 The Last Saga, first of all, what a name, and anybody who tells you on Twitter that this film is one of the bad installments of the franchise is sniffing coke. I mean, come on, look at this Looney Tunes bullshit. This film is so fucking good, despite what Cypher's haircut may tell you. I think this is the film where the most insane shit happens. I mean, yeah, we get that bridge thing, but you know what happens after that bridge thing? Dom calculates this fucking Spider-Man stunt. What is going on? They also in this film try to sell Cena as like at least partially Hispanic, despite the fact that he's whiter than a Viking. Look at young Dom and Jacob, how awfully cast is it? It's beautiful. Any amount of Michael Rooker is an automatic W. This film also brings back Sean and Bow Wow. They play their perception on the real world, so Roman starts to think they're invincible, which is hilariously self-aware. Speaking of which, Roman pulls off this fucking Bugs Bunny ass death-defying scene. They bring back Mia, which is beautiful to see. Dom uses his force abilities again, finally. They send Ludacris and Tyrese Gibson to space in a fucking Fiero. They rebuild the original Toretto house, and we even get this lovely Brian tease. I mean, I just like it a lot. There are some aspects I don't love. I think Han being alive is a bit crazy, and the retcon they tried this time around that he didn't even really die at all, and he was also kind of a secret agent for Mr. Nobody, which doesn't really make sense, and I do definitely think he should have died. See, the death retcons in this franchise work if they don't try to explain it too much, but in this they give a long explanation as to how Han survived, and it's just kind of BS. We saw the events that lead up to his death. It could not have been staged like it was, but I guess when it comes to this franchise, nitpicking when realism doesn't work for you is a bit dumb, I admit. Plus, having Han back is cool despite the fact that he looks old as shit. Also, Cardi B randomly makes an appearance, and I wonder whether this cameo will age as awfully as the Iggy one did from Seven. I doubt it will, but still, it's interesting to think about. Overall, I'm thinking this film is at the bottom of the B tier. It's still incredibly fun and has some of my favourite moments from the franchise, and I just love how in the series, there'll be a villain who wants nothing more than to kill these characters, and in the end they're all just buddies and part of the family. It's great. Good conclusion, good story, insane moments, decent comedy, good installment, B tier. Which brings us to our last and latest installment. Fast X. Now obviously I don't have a lot of footage for this film, so just enjoy the trailers and interview clips I guess, but I called this opening day on Friday, and yeah, this film fucks very much so. Jason Momoa brings his best Joker impression to this role, and he fucking shines in every single scene he's in. It's great seeing what Momoa does with a script that isn't so wound up and serious. He's clearly having such a great little time in this film, and I'm glad he's staying on for other films. He also poses a great threat to the team, which you have to be really standout for us to notice because there are a lot of threats to this team. Also, this film reminds you of the best third act in the franchise, so he gets points for that. I am quite sad that he is possibly the last villain of the series though. I do think Verone coming back would have been fun and would have gave other characters like Roman and Tej a bigger stake in the plot, which they rarely do. It's usually Dom and Brian's ghosts that come back to haunt the team, but yes, Momoa is great. Roman though is considerably less funny. I don't know what it is, but I can't remember a single joke of his the entire time. But the comedy is mostly handled by Momoa, who I said is crushing it. Brie Larson gets introduced here and it's nice to see her in something, and she does very well. John Cena FU someone through the floor. The agency prison looks like a dungeon from a fantasy series. There's a few inside the car shots with Nos, which is a great little callback. They bring back See You Again but incorporate it into the score, which made me a little teary being honest. There are some awful green screen shots, but when they're next to shots of like Dom crashing two helicopters together on a highway before driving straight down an exploding dam, I don't care too much. They bring Giselle back in the very last moments because of course they did. Nobody is ever actually dead in this franchise, are they? This is the third retcon death, and I cannot wait to see how they rationalize her survival in Fast X Part 2. All the cliffhangers are back, even the mid-credit scene which hints at Hobbs' return in the next film, which is nice considering that must mean they squashed their beef or figured out some way for them to bring back this character, because Dwayne Johnson really needs it and I think the franchise really needs it too. So it's a mixed bag for sure. The action isn't as insane, the comedy isn't as great, but the villain is top tier, the stakes are bigger than ever, there's great performances and there's fun little moments, and if anything it sets up the next installments very well. It's so close to being just a little bit better, but it slightly misses the mark, so I'm putting it in the C tier, just above Fast and Furious 6, but even a middle of the road Fast and Furious movie is a good time. And that's it. That's the final list. You know, I have so much to say about this series and each installment individually that I might even do a series one day where I retrospectively review each one in the franchise when it's finally complete, but for now, that's what we got. So have you seen any of the Fast and Furious movies? If so, let me know which ones, let me know what you think of them, let me know what you think of this video, tell me your tier listing of the franchise too, because I read every single comment and reply to as many as possible, and whether it's one from the greatest film franchise or not, as always, keep watching movies.